It is January, in the absolute darkest, most unforgiving stretches of the North Atlantic. The year is 1715. A heavy, three-masted privateer vessel is smashing its way through 50-foot swells. The air temperature outside is -20 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind is howling so violently that the freezing ocean spray turns into razor-sharp ice crystals before it even hits the deck. The rigging is frozen solid. If a sailor takes off his gloves and touches an iron cannon, the moisture on his skin instantly freezes to the metal, and pulling his hand away will rip the flesh right off his palm. In this kind of extreme, bone-shattering cold, human survival usually requires one fundamental thing: a fire. But there is a catastrophic problem. You are trapped inside a wooden box, pitching violently in the dark. A wooden warship of the 18th century was not just made of timber, it was heavily waterproofed and sealed with thousands of pounds of boiling pine pitch, highly flammable tar, and cured oakum. Down in the magazine, sitting just below your feet, are tons of highly explosive black powder. Lighting a heating fire down in the lower decks during a massive winter storm is a guaranteed suicide mission. If a single rogue wave hits the hull and knocks a glowing ember out of an iron stove, the pitch catches fire instantly. And a fire on a wooden ship in the middle of a freezing ocean leaves you with exactly two choices. You either burn to ashes on the deck, or you jump into the black. Freezing water, where the shock of the cold will trigger sudden cardiac arrest in less than 3 minutes. Therefore, fires below decks were strictly, brutally forbidden in heavy weather. The galleys were dead, the stoves were cold. So, how did a crew of 150 privateers, smugglers and whalers survive for months on end in a floating icebox without freezing to death in their sleep? To understand the sheer brutal genius of Arctic survival at sea, you first have to understand what extreme cold does to the human machine. Hypothermia is not just feeling chilly. It is a systematic, mechanical shutdown of your vital organs. When the ambient temperature drops far below freezing, your body goes into absolute panic mode. It immediately restricts blood flow to your skin, your fingers, your toes, and your face. It sacrifices your extremities to keep your core organs warm. Your fingers turn white, then blue, then black, as the tissue literally dies and freezes solid. This is frostbite. If your core temperature drops just a few degrees further, your brain chemistry alters. You become confused. Your heart rate slows to a crawl. You fall asleep, and you never, ever wake up. A wooden ship offers zero insulation. The freezing wind cuts right through the gaps in the upper deck. By all laws of basic physics, a ship without a heating fire in the Arctic Circle should be a floating morgue within 48 hours. But these men didn't die. They didn't freeze. They hacked the thermal dynamics of the ocean using a brilliant, absolutely disgusting survival system. Before I reveal the sickening biological trick they used to turn a freezing ship into a warm incubator, do yourself a massive favor and hit that subscribe button. If you want the raw, uncensored history of human survival that defies all logic, join the ranks of savage ingenuity. Hit subscribe right now. Here is the ultimate cold water survival hack. Cheat code. Number 1. The physics hack. The air temperature whipping across the top deck was -20 degrees. But the privateers knew a fundamental rule of ocean physics. Salt water doesn't freeze at the same temperature as fresh water. The massive, churning ocean beneath them remained liquid at around 28 degrees Fahrenheit. That is incredibly cold, but it is massively warmer than the lethal air above. So, when the men went to sleep, they didn't sleep on the upper decks. They descended deep into the bowels of the ship, into the lowest holds, well below the waterline. Down there, the thick oak hull was completely submerged in the ocean. The ocean water, pressing against the outside of the ship, paradoxically acted as a massive, global insulating blanket. It prevented the temperature in the lower hold from ever dropping to the lethal -20 degrees of the outside air. The ocean itself shielded them from the freezing wind. It was dark, It was damp, but the water trapped the temperature at a survivable baseline. Cheat code. Number 2. The biological radiator. But 28 degrees is still cold enough to kill you over time. They needed active heat. And without a fire, the only heat source available was the human engine. A resting adult male generates about 100 watts of thermal heat, roughly the equivalent of a standard incandescent light bulb. One man alone in a freezing room will die. But privateer ships were heavily overcrewed for battle. You had 150 men packed into a claustrophobic sealed lower deck. They strung their canvas hammocks incredibly tight, 14 inches apart. They were practically sleeping on top of one another. 150 men, generating 100 watts each, equals a 15,000-watt biological heater running non-stop in a sealed, unventilated wooden tube. The results were absolutely repulsive, but highly effective. With the hatches battened down to keep the freezing storm out, the oxygen levels plummeted. The air became a thick, suffocating miasma of carbon dioxide, stale breath, unwashed bodies, and raw sweat. The humidity skyrocketed. The collective breath of over 100 men condensed on the freezing oak timbers of the ceiling and literally rained back down on them as warm, foul-smelling sweat drops. The stench was so incredibly vile that a modern human would likely vomit the second they opened the hatch. But that horrific, stinking wall of body heat was a lifesaver. By trapping themselves in a suffocating biological meat locker, they pushed the ambient temperature of the lower hold up into the 50s. It was a vile, disgusting incubator, but it completely neutralized the threat of hypothermia. They traded fresh air for pure thermal survival. Cheat code. Number 3. The chemical armor. But surviving below deck is only half the battle. Ships don't sail themselves. Every 4 hours, a shift of men had to climb out of that warm, stinking hold, walk out into the -20-degree blizzard, and climb the icy rigging to manage the sails. If you wear standard European clothing, a nice cotton shirt or a woven coat, the freezing ocean spray will instantly soak into the fibers. The wind will freeze that water, and you will be wearing a jacket made of solid ice. You will die of exposure in less than an hour. To survive the watch, these men turned themselves into walking, waterproof fortresses using extreme chemical engineering. They wore a base layer of raw, unprocessed wool. Unlike modern washed wool, this primitive wool was still packed with lanolin, the thick, greasy, natural wax secreted by sheep. Lanolin is naturally hydrophobic. It repels water and retains its insulating heat properties even when it gets damp. It smelled like a wet barn, but it trapped their body heat against their skin. But the outer layer is where the real savage ingenuity comes in. They couldn't buy modern Gore-Tex, so they created their own synthetic armor. They took heavy canvas sailcloth and boiled it in massive vats of pine tar and linseed oil. They painted the cloth with this toxic black sludge until it was completely saturated, and then let it cure. They called them Tarpaulins. When the freezing wind hit this tar-soaked coat, it couldn't penetrate. The ocean spray bounced right off the greasy surface. In the freezing cold, the tar actually hardened, turning the coats into stiff, rigid exoskeletons. The men could barely bend their arms, and they smelled like a walking industrial disaster. But they were 100% windproof and waterproof. The cold simply could not reach their core. When the aristocratic officers of the Royal Navy looked at these privateers and whalers, they saw filthy, tar-stained, foul-smelling savages. But those officers didn't understand the brutal math of extreme survival. The civilized world thinks of warmth as a luxury. They think of roaring fireplaces, clean wool blankets, and hot meals. But when Mother Nature drops the temperature to lethal extremes and you are sitting on top of a wooden bomb, luxury will get you killed. These men survived because they completely abandoned the concept of comfort. They realized that You don't fight the freezing ocean with fire. You fight it by turning your own crew into a massive, stinking biological engine. You fight it by dipping your clothes in toxic tree resin to create an impenetrable shell. They didn't conquer the Arctic by bringing civilization with them. They survived it by becoming just as harsh, ugly, and unforgiving as the environment that was trying to kill them. They turned the deadliest ocean on the planet into their own personal thermal shield. Survival in the darkest corners of history was never about looking clean or smelling good. It was about doing whatever it takes to keep your blood pumping for one more day. If you want to fortify your brain with the most brutal, uncensored survival tactics history has to offer, secure your spot right now. Hit that subscribe button, drop a like on the video, and comment down below with the craziest survival fact that blew your mind. Lock in and get ready for the next deep dive into the savage ingenuity of the past. I will see you in the next video.